This crazy, basically SWAT raid that I got in the middle of. There were two people detained at a house about 2 miles from here, 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house. A man and a woman. It's my understanding that it was a mom and son. They went to the house with the SWAT team. It was a massive presence, and the man and the woman, again, I believe it's a mom and a son from what I'm hearing, came out and there was no issue. They basically, came out, didn't resist at all, and were questioned. And then at the same time, there was a traffic stop very close by outside of Culver's, which is like a fast food place, where another man was stopped and detained and questioned. And that person also has a connection back to the house where the other two were detained, where the SWAT team was. So new today, I am learning from the sheriff. I was texting with the sheriff this morning, the Pima County Sheriff, Chris Nanos. He said that there were no arrests, that they were working off of a lead, that's what started all of this, and that they have not located Nancy Guthrie.
On February 13th, 2026, the quiet high desert landscape of Tucson, Arizona was shattered by the sound of flashbangs and the sight of tactical gear. Brian Entin, reporting live for News Nation, stood just yards away as a Pima County SWAT team descended on a residence less than 2 miles from where 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie had been abducted 12 days prior. For those following the case, this raid felt like the definitive breakthrough. But for Entin, what unfolded at that scene raised more questions than it answered, revealing a series of procedural gaps and concerning observations that shifted the narrative of the entire investigation. The raid targeted a home where two individuals, a man and a woman, were pulled out, zip-tied, and detained. What Entin's reporting captured the raw intensity of the moment: armored Bearcat vehicles blocking suburban streets and K-9 units scouring the perimeter. However, as the dust settled, the concerning nature of the event became clear. Despite the heavy-handed tactical approach, the Pima County Sheriff's Department later confirmed that no arrests were made. The individuals were questioned and released. This discrepancy between the level of force used and the lack of subsequent legal action suggested that investigators were perhaps swinging in the dark, desperate for a lead in a case that was rapidly cooling. What Entin saw was not just a raid, but a symptom of a fractured investigation. He observed that while the SWAT team was highly coordinated, the follow-up forensic sweep of the property appeared rushed. In true crime investigative journalism, the golden hour, the period immediately following a crime or a major discovery, is everything. Entin's concern centered on whether the rush to show action to a grieving public was compromising the meticulous forensic recovery needed to secure a conviction. He highlighted that a Range Rover was towed from a secondary location during the raid, yet official updates on its forensic relevance remained non-existent for weeks. For the viewer, this chapter serves as a lesson in investigative optics versus investigative substance. A SWAT raid is a loud visual display of police power, but Entin's focus was on the silence that followed. He pointed out that active situations are only as good as the evidence they produce. By documenting the release of the detainees and the lack of a clear forensic link back to Nancy Guthrie's home, Entin began to pivot his reporting toward a deeper problem: the potential inexperience of the initial responding supervisors and the mounting pressure of a $1 million reward that was attracting both tips and chaos. The confusion surrounding the SWAT raid in early February was compounded by a critical piece of evidence that surfaced just miles away, a discovery that Brian Entin tracked closely as it moved from a dusty roadside to a federal lab.
That they were conducting at that house, which makes sense to me because I saw a ton of FBI there, and then I saw even more FBI arrive about an hour after the initial SWAT teams arrived. And it was a federal search warrant, which I'm going to talk to Steve Moore, my friend who's a retired FBI agent who has done a ton of these search warrants in his career, about sort of what he sees, what stands out to him about what happened last night. But just so you guys know, when it's a federal search warrant, that means almost always a judge, a federal judge or federal magistrate has to sign the warrant, which means there has to be things in that warrant that justify the search. And it can't just be something vague usually. And Steve is going to explain that. So while the sheriff is saying there were no arrests, that doesn't mean that this is necessarily over. And that's what my sources are also saying, that they are still investigating whatever brought them to that house last night. And you know that they look at the electronics. likely got DNA from people, and they can try and connect that DNA back to Nancy Guthrie's house. Because remember, we were told that there was DNA found inside Nancy Guthrie's house that does not belong to Nancy Guthrie and does not belong to anyone close to her. So it is a stranger's DNA, perhaps the kidnapper's DNA. So they can now go, when they get these tips and these people that they want to talk to, they can swab them for DNA and then...
While the raid provided the spectacle, the real investigative weight shifted to a single discarded glove found in a field near the perimeter of the search zone. Before we dive deeper into the forensic mismatch of that discovery, also let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We want to see how far the 13th juror community reaches. The concerning aspect of what Entin witnessed at the raid was the lack of immediate forensic continuity between the detained individuals and the physical evidence being processed. As the SWAT team moved out, the FBI confirmed a stunning development. A glove found about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home appeared to match the one worn by the masked figure seen on the Ring doorbell footage. This figure, roughly 5 feet 9 inches tall and carrying an Ozark Trail hiker pack, had been caught on camera systematically disabling Nancy's security system. The discovery of the glove should have been the smoking gun that tied the raid's detainees to the crime. However, the forensic reality began to diverge from the tactical actions. Entin reported that while the glove contained DNA, it did not immediately trigger the arrests of the people detained during the Tucson raid. This created a massive version of truth conflict. If the police were confident enough to use flashbangs in armored vehicles, why did the DNA results from the glove not lead to a booking? In investigative journalism, this often points to a non-match or a contaminated sample, which Entin highlighted as a primary concern regarding the Pima County Sheriff's initial handling of the scene. For the viewers and the 13th juror, this phase of the case highlights the vital difference between a lead and probable cause. Entin observed that the authorities were likely operating on pings or neighborhood tips, possibly from the $1 million reward incentive rather than a direct forensic link. By the time the DNA from the glove was being sequenced using deconvolution technology to separate the suspect's profile from environmental contaminants, the suspects from the raid had already been released. This gap in the timeline suggested that the person of interest might still be mobile, a fact that Entin pushed to the forefront of his nightly reports to keep the public vigilant. The most unsettling observation Brian Entin made during the SWAT raid was not the presence of tactical armor, but the physical proximity of the operation to the heart of the Guthrie family circle. The raid took place in a neighborhood just miles from the Catalina foothills, just where Nancy was last seen. As Entin watched, a man and a woman, later rumored to be a mother and son, were led out of the residence. However, the true concerning detail that Entin highlighted was the immediate surge of misinformation that threatened to derail the investigative narrative. During the chaos of the active situation, rumors began to circulate wildly that the raid was targeting the home of Nancy's daughter, Annie, and her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. Entin, maintaining his commitment to factual reporting, was quick to clarify the geography. While the raid was indeed close, it was not at the Cioni residence. This distinction was vital because, as Entin noted, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had already taken the unusual step of publicly clearing the family to protect them from the trial by social media that often hampers high-profile abductions. The investigative takeaway from this chapter is the danger of proximity. Entin observed that in a high-stakes search with a $1 million reward, the police are often forced to act on proximity leads, tips that place suspects near the victim's home or social circle. What Entin saw at the raid was a law enforcement team under immense pressure to produce a result, leading to a massive show of force that ultimately resulted in no arrests. He pointed out that when SWAT is deployed and then retreats without a booking, it often signals that the version of truth held by the police, the belief that the perpetrator was a local operative, is being challenged by the forensic reality. Furthermore, Entin focused on a Range Rover that was towed from a secondary location during the operation. This vehicle became a centerpiece for forensic speculation. Entin noted that if the vehicle was seized during a raid that yielded no suspects, the investigation was likely pivoting toward trace evidence. He educated his viewers on the fact that investigators were looking for more than just Nancy. They were looking for transferred DNA, desert soil samples, or fibers that could link that specific vehicle to the 1:47 a.m. timeline when the security system was breached. Brian Entin's concern remained that the loud nature of the raid might have tipped off the actual career criminal suspect that experts now believe is behind the abduction. The concerning atmosphere of the SWAT raid was only intensified by what Brian Entin identified as a forensic vacuum. While the tactical teams were breaching the Tucson residence, the actual heartbeat of the investigation was centered on a series of disturbing digital and physical traces that seemed to exist in an entirely different reality than the raid itself. Entin highlighted that while law enforcement was focused on the two individuals detained at the scene, the FBI was simultaneously processing a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack and a discarded glove found nearly 10 miles away. The disconnect was palpable. Brian observed that if the masked and gloved individual seen on the Ring camera at 1:47 a.m. was the target of the raid, the lack of immediate charges suggested a failure in direct linkage. In investigative terms, this is where two versions of truth often collide. The police version, which sought an immediate local suspect, and the forensic version, which pointed toward a highly mobile career criminal. Entin noted that the interior of Nancy's home was described as immaculate, with no signs of a struggle, a detail that contradicts the necessity of a violent SWAT entry unless the suspect was believed to be armed and holding the victim inside. For the viewer, the lesson here is the doctrine of targeted abduction. Entin pushed the narrative that this was not a burglary gone wrong. The precision with which the security system was dismantled suggests someone who had pre-scouted the foothills property. Entin's reporting from the raid site raised the alarm that the police might have been reacting to reward-driven tips rather than verified forensic pings. In a case with a $1 million incentive, the influx of nearly 5,000 tips can create a noise that leads tactical teams to the wrong doors, potentially allowing the actual perpetrator to slip further into the desert. Finally, Entin's concern peaked when he documented the arrival of specialized forensic units after the SWAT team had cleared the house. He questioned the sequence. Why was the forensic sweep not the primary driver of the tactical action? If the DNA found on the mixed sample from Nancy's doorknob didn't match the detainees, the raid served as a loud visual distraction from a trail that was rapidly going cold. Entin's reporting reminds us that in high-profile abductions, the most concerning sight isn't always the presence of the police, but the absence of the suspect once the handcuffs are removed. As the investigation moved into its second week, Brian Entin's reporting shifted focus toward the geospatial anomalies that made the Tucson raid so deeply concerning. While the tactical operation was a localized event, the forensic evidence was beginning to paint a map that spanned much further south toward the Rio Rico area and the international border. Entin observed that if the individuals detained in the raid were the primary suspects, the search efforts should have been intensifying around that specific neighborhood. Instead, he saw specialized units and blacked-out vehicles moving in the opposite direction. The concerning reality was that the raid may have been a response to digital ghosting. Entin pointed out that Nancy's security system wasn't just unplugged, it was professionally bypassed. Forensic experts told Entin that this level of technical proficiency is rarely found in the local opportunistic criminals typically targeted in neighborhood SWAT raids. This created a jarring version of truth conflict. The police were conducting loud physical breaches while the evidence suggested a silent, high-tech predator. Entin's concern was that the investigation was fighting a 21st century ghost with 20th century tactics. For the viewer, this chapter provides a lesson in digital forensics and signal analysis. Entin reported on the pings that investigators were tracking, not from a phone, but from the security system's internal logs. He noted that there was a 25-minute window between the camera being disconnected and the all-clear signal being suppressed. This window is where the abduction occurred. Entin questioned why, if the raid suspects were the culprits, no forensic evidence of this high-tech tampering, such as specialized jamming devices or bypass software, was recovered from the Tucson residence during the sweep. Furthermore, Entin highlighted the growing role of the $1 million reward in complicating the forensic trail.
I'm coming on to say it is day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. And every hour and minute and second and every long night has been agony since then, of worrying about her and fearing for her and aching for her, and most of all, just missing her, We know that millions of you have been praying. So many people have been praying of every faith and no faith at all, praying for her return, and we feel those prayers. Please keep praying without ceasing. We still believe. We still believe in a miracle. We still believe that she can come home. Hope against hope. As my sister says, we are blowing on the embers of hope. We also know that she may be lost. She may already be gone. She may have already gone home to the Lord that she loves and is dancing in heaven with her mom and her dad and with her beloved brother Pierce and with our daddy. And if this is what is to be, then we will accept it. But we need to know where she is. We need her to come home. For that reason, we are offering a family reward of up to $1 million for any information that leads us to her recovery. All of the information about this reward and the details is in the caption below. You can call the 1-800-TIP line. You can be anonymous if you want. Someone out there knows something that can bring her home. Somebody knows. And we are begging you to please come forward now. We also know that we are not alone in our loss. We know there are millions of families that have suffered with this kind of uncertainty. And for that reason today, we also are donating $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for their work in helping families who are coping with loss and actively looking for those who are lost. We are hoping that the attention that has been given to our mom and our family will extend to all the families like ours who are in need and need prayers and need support. So please, if you hear this message, if you've been waiting and you haven't been sure, let this be your sign to please come forward, tell what you know, and help us bring our beloved mom home so that we can either celebrate a glorious, miraculous homecoming or celebrate the beautiful, brave, and courageous and noble life that she has lived. Please.
That he observed that high-value rewards often lead to forced leads, where individuals provide tips on people they simply don't like or who look the part, leading to scenes like the SWAT raid. Entin's reporting emphasized that while the public saw action, the forensic reality was one of negative results. The blood found on Nancy's doorstep remained the only definitive piece of physical evidence, and it was not leading back to the people in zip ties. This gap indicated that the mask and glove perpetrator was likely someone with no prior digital or criminal footprint in the Tucson area. The concerning developments during the Tucson SWAT raid reached a boiling point when Brian Entin reported on the forensic mismatch regarding the discovery of multiple gloves in the surrounding desert. While the SWAT team was clearing the home, the FBI was analyzing a glove found nearly 10 miles away. Entin's reporting highlighted a critical breakdown in the version of truth being provided to the public. Investigators eventually confirmed that the DNA found on the glove at the side of the road did not match the DNA found inside Nancy's home, nor did it match the individuals detained during the raid. This revelation was a massive blow to the investigation's momentum. Entin observed that if the glove, initially thought to be a primary forensic link, was unrelated, then the masked and gloved individual seen on the 1:47 a.m. footage was still an unidentified phantom. This raised the unsettling possibility that the Tucson raid was based on circumstantial proximity rather than forensic certainty. Entin's concern centered on the clock is ticking reality for a victim as vulnerable as Nancy, who has a pacemaker and limited mobility. For the viewers, this chapter illustrates the concept of forensic red herrings. In high-profile cases, the pressure to find evidence can lead to the collection of items that are environmentally noisy but legally irrelevant. Entin noted that Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos had to defend the lack of arrests by stating they were keeping an open mind, but to an investigative journalist, keeping an open mind after a SWAT raid often signals a loss of the trail. Entin pointed out that the $1 million reward remained a double-edged sword. It kept the case in the headlines, but it also flooded the system with low-quality tips that led to these loud, unproductive, tactical displays. Finally, Entin highlighted the interagency friction that became visible during this phase. While the Pima County Sheriff's Department led the local raids, the FBI was the entity pushing for DNA deconvolution to separate the complex mixtures found on Nancy's doorknob. Entin's reporting suggested that the local department's rush to execute the raid may have been at odds with the federal agent's preference for a silent surveillance approach. This friction is a classic forensic hurdle, and Entin's observations at the scene provided a rare window into the internal chaos that can occur when a high-profile investigation begins to stall. The fallout from the SWAT raid transitioned from a tactical failure to a forensic mystery that Brian Entin highlighted as one of the most significant stalls in the investigation. As the detainees were released and the yellow crime scene tape was removed from the Tucson residence, Entin observed a startling detail. The $1 million reward, rather than helping, was beginning to cloud the truth. He reported on a series of Bitcoin ransom demands that began appearing in late March, claiming to have information on Nancy's whereabouts. The concerning aspect Entin focused on was the shift in the perpetrator's profile. Initially, the raid targeted individuals thought to be local, perhaps desperate for the reward or acting on opportunity. However, the sophisticated ransom letters suggested a much more organized entity. Entin's reporting emphasized that crypto is the ultimate crime scene, and he interviewed cybersecurity experts who explained that while the kidnappers believed they were anonymous, the digital trail of a Bitcoin demand provides a different kind of DNA for the FBI to track. For the viewer, this chapter explores the anatomy of a ransom. Entin noted that the back doors of Nancy's home had been found propped open, a detail that suggests the abduction was a grab-and-go operation. If the people in the raid were not responsible, the two versions of truth now involved a potential local collaborator and a digital savvy extortionist. Entin pushed the question, why was the raid conducted with such force if the primary lead had already pivoted toward digital extortion and high-level tracking? The chapter concludes with Entin's observations on the Guthrie family's resilience. Despite the confusion of the raid and the release of suspects, Savannah Guthrie's return to the Today Show on April 6th signaled a transition in the public narrative. Entin reported that the search is no longer just a local Tucson police matter. It has become a global forensic effort. He noted that the concerning silence following the raid was finally being broken by new DNA deconvolution attempts, as investigators returned to the house to look for microscopic touch DNA that might have been overlooked in the initial chaotic sweep. The SWAT raid on February 13, 2026, remains a defining moment of investigative friction in the search for Nancy Guthrie. For Brian Entin, the sights and sounds of that evening, the flashbangs, the tactical armor, and the zip-tied detainees were a jarring contrast to the silence that followed. As of mid-April 2026, with no arrests made from that operation and the detainees released, the raid serves as a case study in the concerning gap between a tactical show of force and the quiet precision of forensic science. The forensic reality has since moved into a more complex phase. While the raid targeted a local residence, the FBI has shifted its primary focus to the masked figure seen in the 1:47 a.m. footage. Forensic genetic genealogy, IgG, is currently the leading hope, as experts like C.C. Moore work to deconvolve the mixed DNA samples found on the home's doorknob and the discarded glove. This shift suggests that the version of truth held by authorities during the raid, that a local, high-risk suspect was hiding in a nearby suburban home, has been challenged by a forensic trail that points toward a more calculated, possibly mobile perpetrator. Ultimately, what Entin witnessed at the raid was an investigation under the immense pressure of a $1 million reward and a high-profile victim. The lack of a forensic match between the raid site and Nancy's home has left the 13th juror community with a haunting realization. While the police were breaching doors in Tucson, the actual trail was likely already stretching toward the border or deep into the digital web of ransom demands. The case now sits at a crossroads where the golden hour has passed, and only the most advanced DNA technologies can cut through the noise of that chaotic February night. The search for Nancy Guthrie continues, not with armored vehicles, but through the microscopic analysis of trace evidence. For the investigators and the public alike, the lesson of the Tucson raid is clear. In a case this complex, the action is never a substitute for a forensic match. As Brian Entin continues to report from the ground, the focus remains steadfast on the only facts that haven't changed: the blood at the doorstep, the missing camera, and the unwavering hope that Nancy will be found.